107, you say? Oh, it looks a lot nicer with that steering wheel in there. Hello and welcome to episode 107 of Retropower Uncut. I'm going to start with the Stratos, which has successfully passed its IVA test, I'm pleased to announce. I'm just trying to think, we'd failed last week, but the wait time for the retest was remarkably short, a week, so we basically had 4 days, I think it was, to sort it out and get it ready. And yeah, we smashed through all the things we needed to do. We needed a quieter exhaust, so we took that apart again, did a load of changes inside it, restricted it more, baffled it more, and managed to get that through. And then basically worked our way through the various other minor details on it. One of the big pluses, and I can't remember whether I mentioned this last week actually, is that it now has glass windows. I think I did mention that. So that is good. So the process essentially of registering a new car is that we start the application for the IVA test. You get invited to do the test. Once you pass the test, you get a certificate. That then has to be sent off as a supporting document along with the form to apply for a new registration, which, along with some other documents, which has all gone off now. So it now is in the hands of the DVLA, which could mean anything. But fingers crossed, at some point in the not too distant future, we'll get a registration document through for this. In the meantime, we're just ploughing on with sort of the remaining list of details, little snag list details to sort out. Reverting a few things that were done temporarily for the test, just basically pushing it through to completion. The rear clam is off. We're going to be changing the louvre panel for the custom one we've done. But one thing we wanted to do for a while, and we were sort of deciding whether to bite the bullet with it or not, and finally decided to, is that it really needed a little bit more clearance around the fuel cap. Because when you open and close the clam, you kind of had to pull it in a certain way to get it around the fuel cap, and I didn't really think it was acceptable. So we decided to just fettle that out bigger and repaint the clam for the back. So the guys have got it next door, they're just starting that at the minute. So it'd be good to get that sort of perfect on the closing of that. And then we've got a number of jobs to do, get the audio system in now. We're going to do a secondary latch method for the clam. So if it did somehow come unlatched, I'm petrified that if it came unlatched when you were driving along, immediately it's a massive air brake and would probably, at any significant speed, probably fly back and shatter into 1,000 pieces. So we're going to do some little check straps sort of things here that you can reach in and release, but they stop it opening more than about that far. And a few other little jobs, so we're kind of on the countdown to completion on that. Land Cruiser, a few little jobs on this, not a massive amount. We've done the straps that hold these tanks in here. We just wanted some really neat kind of stainless steel straps. We could have just used big Jubilee clips, but they would have looked a bit rough and ready. So we've rolled up these stainless straps that just have a bolted flange on them, and there's a neoprene padded strip around inside there to stop them rattling and chafing. We got a load of parts back from Xylan, so the bumper bolts, so the bumper's now on, and I think some of the electric handbrake components that had been away for plating have been refitted. Excitingly though, the leather for this, which we've been waiting for quite a while, should be arriving today or tomorrow. It's like a manually woven leather where they strip the leather down into thin strips, laminate it onto a background in a sort of woven pattern. That's been made by a tannery in Italy, and they shut down for the whole month of August, so it was a bit of a wait to get that leather here. That'll be here today or tomorrow. That's going to go straight over to Dean at Trimworks, who's going to do the upholstery of the seats. So that is going to be one of the sort of finishing touches ready to go in this. Transformations to be coming over the coming weeks. And speaking of upholstery, the seats for the Mustang are done and in, and I'm very happy with the result on that. We sort of came up with this plan to upholster those Recaro LXs, they were old Capri seats, to match the rear seat. So we've done a black vinyl, the same as the back. And then the original front seats had these little metal sort of rectangles on that the rears also have, which are almost exactly the same size as the Recaro badges on those Recaro type seats. So we've actually fitted them in the place of where the Recaro badges would fit. So it really ties the front and back together nicely. Carpets are all in now, door cards in, so we're almost there. James has been making this infill panel here for the front, which he's just been polishing up. getting there now. I think once he's happy with that, that's all going to be riveted together and bolted in place, and that just tidies up the front of the appearance here and helps the incoming air through the grille be forced through the radiator rather than being able to go over the top. So bit of cosmetic, bit of function. I suspect next week we'll be into test drive on this. Hopefully you get it for an MOT. There'll be a bit of a snag list, no doubt, and if depending on how quickly we can get through that snag list, ready for handover. So very exciting times on the Mustang. I shall sneak through this way. Okay, Manta, we had some plating bits back, which I mentioned, some of which were on the Land Cruiser. That's allowed us to put the handbrake cable setup and the gearbox crossmember all back in now for the final time, so that's good. And then he's been working on the breather tank arrangement, so the bracket for the breather tank. We made some adapters for the spigots on the rocker covers to allow us to do air-equipped type fittings for the breathers. So that's all plumbed in now, looks really neat. So yeah, good progress on that. I might as well dwell on this for a sec. We were doing the design work for the system we're going to use to model the shape changes on the bonnet. And we'd basically come up with the fact we were going to use a load of little plasma cut mild steel segments which will be arranged on the bonnet in a particular pattern. George has designed those so they all line up with certain, like the split lines in the bonnet, and there's a certain order to them all. They've got a little number of grooves in each one, so they're effectively numbered so they, you know, which order they go in. They've now been plasma cut, so that was a massive session of plasma cutting yesterday, and we're ready to start attaching those to the bonnet. So the next step on this is we're going to get the bonnet on, make sure that's all aligned as we want it to be, and then we'll start tacking all those segments on. And once they're done, this will go around to the body shop and they can start essentially sculpting the areas between those ribs so it becomes a new three-dimensional shape. We're also going to do the other changes. We've got the indicator sort of plinths to remove on it, fill those in, make sure the grill's nice and symmetrical. In fact, on that note, we've also made a checking template for the grill aperture to make sure that's the perfect symmetrical shape. And then we can start sculpting all those changes, ready to pull some moulds from this to make the carbon bonnet. And on the subject of carbon, actually, we've not mentioned the Jensen CV8, and a few people have been asking about it. Now, the reason we keep forgetting to mention it is because it's not in the workshop. It's over at KS Composites at the minute, but they're getting on really well. They're well into the mould taking process at the moment, essentially using out the body we've created as a book to then form the moulds over. Those moulds will be removed, and then once those moulds are ready, they can then make the new body within those moulds. So we might actually pop over to KS at some point to show you that, but I think we've just put a couple of pictures on for the minute of where we're at with it currently. Morris, so the radiator arrived. That was an exciting moment last week. Concept Racing have made that radiator for us. As usual, nice work of art. We really wanted to have a really extended top tank on it. Because there's loads of space under that central section of bonnet, we wanted to take advantage of that to have an extended central section so that the top of the radiator is the highest point of the cooling system, because obviously if you look at where the water takeoff was on the water rail, that's fairly high up, and we wanted to make sure we had an area elsewhere in the system that was as high as that, and it gives us a nice amount of expansion room in the radiator. There's a little tube in the top. If you're wondering what the random weld in the middle of the top tank is, there's actually a tube been welded in across it to essentially brace it and stop it ballooning under pressure. It's got the mounts for the fan on there. We've also got bosses welded in the bottom to mount the lower radiator hose, which John's been working on actually, and that's now done. So you've still got a diagonal crossover of flow in the radiator, and then we've got an aluminium pipe coming across, which is bracketed off the bottom of the radiator to feed up to the water pump on the engine. And then we've got threaded bosses in the bottom for attaching wiring, which I think John's now attached as well. We're just waiting for a flexible hose for the top hose there, which should be here tomorrow. That will finish off the coolant plumbing there. So actually we're looking pretty good, because John also filled and bled the brakes on this week. So I think last week we were just getting the front covers on the tanks there. They're done. So brakes are now filled, bled, leak checked, all good. As soon as that top hose is in, the coolant could be filled. Fuel system's ready to go. John wired in the fuel pump yesterday, ran the wires for that. So the fuel system's basically ready to go. He's just stuck an oil filter on it today, which was the last part of the oil system to do. So essentially all the fluid systems, once we've done the coolant hoses, are ready to go. And I think actually even the aircon plumbing's ready to go. So we're getting perilously close to the first fire up on this. Other things, he's just been cutting out the grill. We're going to do a sort of a plasma cut, I think, surround for the grill, but we've got this sort of hex plastic mesh that we're going to use for it. So we've just been getting that close to the right shape, so we can now create the border and attach that to the back of it. That will finish off the front. Adam's just been fitting the bonnet catches. So we're kind of working up to fitting the bonnet again. We're just no point doing that until we've just finished the last bits of plumbing, because it gets in the way a bit. But as soon as they're done, we'll get the bonnet on, that can be latched. And also Scott finished the section he'd just started making last week, which was the sort of tunnel infill piece that blocks off the last bit of open tunnel around the gear shifter. It's got some studs on it which are going to use to hold a bezel that has like a rubber seal around the shifter. So that means I can now get the sound deadening in, mount the various electrical components that go under the console, get the console in, and we'll be looking pretty good. So yeah, it's a lot of excitement all around at the minute, because the Mustang's about ready for first drive. This is perilously close to first startup. The Stratos is perilously close to actual completion. It's pretty exciting all around. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Nat in the metal workshop. Winter's drawing in, you might notice, so be aware we've got plenty of hoodies and beanies available in the shop. Here's Nat with the rest of the tour.
Well, hello folks, thanks Cal for the handover, and here we are in the fabrication shop for another Retropower Uncut. So we'll start with the second Mark 1 Escort, Project Kuma, I think it's called. I'm not quite sure the background on that one, I probably should have checked, but anyway, I think that's what it's called. We've done a few little bits and bobs on this. As I say, we're working on this sort of in the background. We're only really building one of the Mark 1 Escort body shells at a time. However, we've been getting ahead a little bit on this while Rich has had the opportunity to get on with a few tasks. He's been getting us ahead slightly on some of the repair work that needed doing. Just getting the old panels removed, measurements taken, edges refurbished and finished and that side of things. So as you can see, we have a great big gaping hole where the rear panel was. The rear panel had a few bits of damage on it, had a few bits of corrosion on it. It wasn't terrible, but enough that it warranted at least being removed and then put back on. And by the time you've done that, it's better to just replace it. So that's been replaced. He's repaired the ends of the chassis rails. They weren't bad, there was just a little bit of pitting and a couple of little pinholes in the end caps for the rails. So he's replaced those and got that all pretty much ready to receive the new panel. He's been doing a little bit of tidying up here, but there's a couple of bits that are slightly awkward to do that I need to have a look at really up here, where again, you may remember from previously, the car had already had a rear scuttle replacement, and the inside metalwork at the ends has been done pretty badly. It's sort of been knocked about quite badly, so we need to rectify that. So that's just, the new scuttle's just sat on there at the moment. We've got to come back to that and deal with that. I'm going to wander this way, past the side of the car where Rich has popped the wiper motor in, and I've just thrown the heater bubble on, because we're doing a little bit, we're also making use of this car from the point of view of a bit of mock-up to help, because it's a bit easier to work on this car than the other one, while there are already two people working on that one. Rather than having three of us on one car, I'm doing some of the mock-up work that I can do on this body shell. It's easier for me to get at. And that's for the heater, which is over there on the table, working out a bracketry system to enable us to fit that heater, that type of heater, into both of these cars. It's a heater and an air conditioning unit, and it's got climate control function. It's quite a decent, it's quite a nice setup. But we've had to, I'm trying to make the brackets modular so that they can be easily fitted to both cars. They've got a fair amount of adjustment because the mounting points on these vintage air heater boxes are not the most precisely located. So you have to make the brackets reasonably adjustable, but at the same time they need to be reasonably strong because it's quite a heavy unit. So I'm trying to design a bracket that works easily with the unit, has the adjustment, but also so that the CAD work isn't wasted for the future. I wanted to get it so that we can use at least part of the modular brackets on other builds in the future as well. So I'm trying to think ahead a little bit. So I've got sort of some way forward with that, but that's involving putting it in and out of the car a lot to try and work out where it's going to sit. So I've been doing that on here. So I've got the heater bubble mocked on. We've spot welded on the nut plate, basically the reinforcing plate that has all the holes in it, which will carry the riv nuts when the body shell's finished. There's a set of riv nuts that are going to bolt the inner plate into the back of the heater intake area. Originally on these cars, that area was almost impossible to paint because it could only be accessed through the top, which was designed to stop rainwater getting drawn in by the heaters, and thus also stop paint getting in there quite efficiently as well. So we take the back out of that so that we can bolt that in. We seal that in and bolt it in from the back. That prevents the rainwater getting inside the car, but it also means we can get in there to paint it. And that bolt-in plate, which is roughly that, it won't be quite be that, but it's basically that will bolt on to do that. But that plate is also then going to carry, not quite like that, but sort of like that. Basically, that plate is going to carry the weight of the forward half of the HVAC unit. And then these are going to have some spigots on which need to be CNC plasma cut with a little band around the side. These will be set through that plate. I'll cut some more of these plates with the holes in. This is just a mock-up one to work out the positioning. But once that's done, these will be positioned through there. That spigot will be spot welded into that plate and seal it in, and then that will carry a short length of this ducting that will feed the air from the spigot in the plate where it mounts on the bulkhead onto a sort of a plastic 3D printed trumpet assembly that will fit to the fan intake. And there'll be a very short piece of ducting, 4-inch ducting between the two for the main air intake for the HVAC unit. So that's where that's at. And as I say, last week, Rich was just getting to the tail end of panel removal on the front. He's also done a bit of repair work and made up the repair sections for the top of the A panels and for the ends of the upper bulkhead panel. So yeah, a little bit of progress on that. And as I say, some of this is also then progress for the other car. That's the main drive, is to get the HVAC installation done in the other car, which we'll pick up on in a minute. But while we're walking past, have a little look at Churchill. Stu's hiding behind a door. Beginning of the week, I believe it was the beginning of the week anyway, Stu was just finishing off welding the cappings and finishing off the metalwork at the front end of the sills before that all gets panelled in. So he was finishing off the metalwork at the front where you may remember from previously, he's put a 4-inch tube, 4-inch 16-gauge tube all the way through the sills, both sides on this car, to really strengthen it up quite a bit because they were incredibly weak body shells originally. It's quite deceptive really. People tend to think of a Mark II Jag as, because it's sort of a bit of a gangster car and all this sort of history that they kind of go with, and they kind of give the illusion of being a big strong car. They're actually not very strong at all. They're incredibly weak body shells, and actually putting those tubes through the sills has added a lot of strength to the body shell. So that's why we've done it. But Stu's just got to the stage of capping the front of that off, and then he's moved back on to the bulkhead, seating, steering, pedals and control, pedals, steering, all that side of the controls. Because he needs to get, basically, the next step really is fabricating the bulkhead. But that ties into so much else. There's a lot of other points drawn into the mix at that point. One of which is the seat. The seat position needs to be finalised, and the seat mounting's really finalised in tandem with finalising the steering position and the pedal position. So I know Cal and Stu have been working on that and working out the positions there. Stu's been shaping up the front sections of the transmission tunnel where it meets the bulkhead, basically the first portion of the bulkhead transition into the transmission tunnel where it covers the front part of the transmission. Stu's been making those sections. And also then he's made the mountings for the pedal box into the bulkhead, all the peripheral parts basically of the bulkhead, which he'll then tie together with the actual sheet metal work of the bulkhead. But again, he's going to tie into a similar job that I am with the Escort, which is then the HVAC unit has got to be put into the bulkhead area as well, and that's also got to be designed in tandem with the bulkhead metalwork. So it's at that quite complicated stage where there's a sort of a whole domino rally effect of jobs, all of which tie together to getting the bulkhead done. So he's starting, I think, are you working on the seat mounts at the minute? Yeah, he's just looking at seat positions and seat mounts at the moment, which is one of and the steering column position and mounting, because that's all really, all of the bulkhead work is tied into that. So it's not the most photogenic stage of the process. but it's all very necessary, and there's quite a lot of hours of work that don't really bring much to camera, really, around this point, around this part of the build, because there's a lot of technical sort of chin stroking and head scratching as to how to mount everything in the bulkhead area of the car. Stu's reveling with his very, very fancy laser he's got now, which is he's been using quite a bit this week. His new green line laser that's actually really visible, and I'm going to buy one for myself as well because they're really quite impressive. For a cheap tool, they're really quite useful. So yeah, we're going to get myself one of those as well. But yeah, that's all coming together. We've got the X300 telescopic and tilt adjustable steering column. I believe that arrived. Yeah, that arrived this week as well. That's just a second-hand steering column, but they're really quite nice. And we've discovered that they're very easy to shorten as well. They pretty much just need adjusting shorter. There's almost nothing to change really to make them shorter. They're brilliant from that point of view. And they're actually really nicely engineered. The tilt lock mechanism is beautiful on them, and this telescope lock mechanism is also beautiful on them. So a really nice piece for a manual adjustable column in both with tilt and telescope. They're a really nice piece. So that's sort of loosely mocked up in there, and yeah, there'll be more progress to report next week as Stu plugs away with getting all the technical bulkhead area of the car worked on. And moving on to the Escort, Tom's been busily working on I call it a roll cage. It's not really a cage, it's a roll bar. We've put a rear half cage in this car, and because we'd already put the harness tube in, which isn't really just a harness tube, it actually is also the top part for the rear bulkhead, and it actually carries some of the suspension load as well. That was already there, so effectively it's just a hoop and two diagonals. But it needed to be very, very neat, and there was a couple of areas we wanted to get the rear stay bars parallel with the rear window aperture so that that line carries on through. We wanted the hoop to be parallel to the B pillar, which it is perfectly, and also to have it all nice and concentric to the shell and quite tight to the shell. Not too tight, but just nice and concentric and very clean. And that's worked out really, really well. Everything's come out nicely. I did the hoop last week. I think that was covered on the video last week. We bent the hoop up there, and I drew that up on CAD, just double checking it all fit in the car sort of before I actually bent it. Sort of with good fortune, because there is a little element of error when you're using a manual tube bender, but it came out pretty much bang on to the CAD, and that comes out, and that actually sits really nicely in the car. So that's worked out well. Then Tom's got that all chopped up dead straight, put his magnets in there to hold it all exactly where we want it, then measured up for the diagonals, cut a cardboard template to get the end profiles for the diagonals so that they correctly follow the profile at the bottom and the top, and got the rotation between the two profiles as accurate as he could, because that's quite tricky. And then put that profile on the top, got that in position, swung the bottom into place, and then tweaked the profile on the bottom until that worked right, and then basically made a mirror of that tube for the other side and got them as exactly as he can, the same length, so everything sits exactly square. Then we had a final eyeball around it, final tape measure, final check for concentricity, symmetricality, is that the word? I always say that. Basically making sure it's all symmetrical, all the lines are parallel, the top of the cage is dead horizontal with reference to the front and rear screen apertures, because they look terrible if they're out, and all the lines flow and everything's neat and everything's symmetrical, and yeah, it's a beautiful job. That's all done. He's then moved on to the seat crossmember stroke rear lower bulkhead, floor bulkhead, I guess you'd call it. I don't really know what you call it. Basically, there's a small low bulkhead across the floor pan, slightly ahead, but in a similar position to where the original seat box crossmember would be in a Mark 1 Escort. But it actually stiffens the floor area up, and actually, if you were four-linking, doing a traditional four-link job on an Escort, with the long type four-links as fitted to the Mark II and the late Mark 1s for Group 4 rallying, where the forward end of the four trailing links would all mount to an area where that seat box sort of cross member would be. It's not that strong. I mean, you wouldn't want to just tie the link bars into it without some roll cage tied to it as well, but that's where they ended on the Group 4 cars. We built a similar box, which is the forward end of where the rear subframe mountings go on this independent rear end car. But that box does two jobs. It partly boxes the floor in and gives us a raised floor area above the subframe to give us exhaust clearance and prop shaft clearance and diff clearance, etc. but it also, the forward edge of that then ties into another bit of structure we've put across that ties into the bottom of the cage legs and the inside of the inner quarters. So ties all of that together, and also forms a little bulkhead that obviously everything will be trimmed in there, but that gives us a little storage cubby. We can put a rubbing strip over there so you can just throw a soft bag in the back, or when you don't really want to put things in the boot, if you're just jumping in the car and throwing a bit of luggage, you can just throw it over your shoulder, throw it in the back. It'll kind of get caught by the bulkhead, won't slide around. You can drive the car, and then when you want your bag or whatever, or your coat or whatever you've just thrown in the back, you can just grab it out and get out again. It's just a handy place for stuff to get caught and not slide around inside the car. So that was the other purpose of that, and that will have a sort of little rubbing strip across the top, and we'll do various obviously there'll be carpeted trim and leather trim, etc. around that. I think the current plan is that the roll cage in this will be trimmed in leather. I say roll cage again, the rear half cage will be trimmed in leather. So again, the installation and design of that was done such that it's possible to trim it without too much trauma. I mean, it's a fairly traumatic job doing that at the best of times, but it's to minimise the amount of trauma involved in doing that. That's where that lot's at. Scott's still working on the front. He's working on the lower front panel at the moment, because now we've replaced the upper front panel, and we deduced that we may as well replace the sides, because by the time we've messed around with them to make them all do the things we want them to do, they're nothing like the shape of the originals, so we've replaced them. Now we've had to replace the bottom, because we've had to cut most of the middle out of it for the radiator and for the expanded bottom tank on the radiator, which accepts the oil cooler, the engine oil cooler, which will be built into the radiator. By the time we've done all that, we've chopped so much out of the original sort of body crossmember, if you like, the bit that sits behind and supports the front valance, that actually we might as well remake all that. So he's drawn on CAD the upper section of that, CNC cut it, and then flanged all the sides of it. And he's now working on flanging the lower section of that. It's sort of a 90-degree box shape with the valance forming the other 3/4, if you like, or the other quarter, I guess, 3/4, don't know what you'd say. Basically capping it off. It's a 90-degree with a curved face on the other side. And he's basically, and both the flanges on the two straight pieces, the two cross sections, the flanges where they meet the valance are both slightly curved. He's done the upper piece. He's now working on the vertical piece with a curved lower flange on it to meet the valance. And that's where the valance is finally spot welded underneath. So that's what he's working on at the moment. That's coming together. He's also done the dry sump tank cutout. I think he just started on that last week. That's all finished and all finished welded now, so the dry sump tank sits in there nicely. And then a bit further down the line, he'll make the mounting bracket that basically the dry sump tank will bolt on via 2 bolts up from underneath onto a modified version of the original front anti-roll bar bracket. Where that bracket sits in the corner, there'll be an upper part to it with 2 holes in and 2 bolts that go through and bolt the dry sump tank down into the inner wing, and then the top part of the dry sump tank's held in place by I think it's a 5/8 UNF. It's a fluid union. I think it's AN10. I've forgotten now. Fluid union that screws through the inner wing, a bulkhead fluid union that screws into the tank through the inner wing. Doughty washer against the inner wing, pulls that up, and then a nut and a doughty washer on the other side, pulls the tank against the inner wing and seals it to it, and that's the breather connection and mounts the top of the tank. And on the other side there's a short length of pipe which then fits to a breather catch tank that's bolted in under the inner wing behind the headlight on that side, which will also have a little drain facility and a stone guard and various other things on it. So that's all the next phase on there. And then Tom's sort of next step, he's doing a couple of little finishing off, tidying up jobs. And then his next stage is, now we've had the customer visit and confirm seating positions. So the next phase, major phase for Tom, is going to be sorting out the seat mountings inside the car. So we're going to get the seats re-mocked up, or mocked up again inside the car, and then we can start fabricating the seat mounts. Things are progressing pretty well, and obviously in parallel in the background we covered that with the other car was the heater, which I'm kind of mocking up on that one, but then we'll be fitting all of the mountings into this car for the heater and also the steering column, and doing some modifications to the pedal box as well. So that's where we're at on that. And finally we'll come over here and we will go to the body shop, where we are on with the E-Type. We have, as you can see, we're on with blocking the final primer blocking on the E-Type. We, as of this morning, this was unmasked this morning, and Gaz got the, it was you did the Raptor, wasn't it? I'm saying Gaz, I don't normally like name names, but I know Gaz was putting the Raptor on yesterday on this, the body, what's the colour called? I can't remember. Dark blue,
Enzian
but
blue or something?
what's that?
Porsche, Enzian blue.
Enzian blue. Is it ensign blue? Is that, I've no idea. I've no idea what it's called. It's a dark metallic blue anyway. That's been we've used as we always do on the underside. The car's been zinc metal sprayed. It was then epoxy primed. And then we've got the bare metal blasted, zinc metal sprayed, epoxy primed, and then U-Pol Raptor tinted with the dark metallic Porsche blue, which I can't remember the exact name of, and then lacquered over. So it's easy to wash, easy to keep clean, really corrosion resistant, stone chip resistant. Just an incredibly durable sort of protection for the underside of the car that looks really smart as well. It looks a lot nicer than just having a black car underneath. On the subject of the black, obviously inside the car, that's been done with a textured finish, black Raptor. That's all trimmed. Basically every face in there is trimmed. So all of that's been done in a black textured Raptor, which covers really well, deadens sound, loads of corrosion protection, loads of damage protection, easy to apply, real winner of a coating really. It's just a nice way of finishing all the surfaces inside the car. It really gives them good protection and just makes them look smart even once they, underneath the trim it all still looks smart once all the trim's in place. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. The bonnet, I think we covered it before, but they've made the guys have made a little buggy for the bonnet. I think we probably covered that last week, but they made a little buggy for the bonnet so that the bonnet doesn't get damaged. It's held in its assembled position while it's painted. And then the plan, I think we talked about having the bonnet put on the car and chopped open. I think it was somebody made the point, probably Gaz, I think, that actually it would be entirely, given the fact we're going to have to take the bonnet back off to do the mechanical assembly, probably makes a lot more sense to paint it off the car but just park it in front of the car. It's the same as having the bonnet on and open in terms of the paint finish. It's still being painted at the same time with the same paint from the same mix, so it makes no odds in that from that point of view. So yeah, the bonnet will be living on its little buggy from now basically until it needs to go on the car. So that'll be living on there, but it'll be painted together with the car. Panels are all in epoxy, final coat of epoxy primer as well, so they're all ready for blocking. Once the body's blocked, we'll block the panels.
Frames in the booth ready to be painted.
Ah yes, I forgot about the frame. Well reminded, Mark's just reminded me by saying that. Yeah, the frame's in the booth ready to be painted. What they've done with the front frame is that's a body colour finish on the frame, but there's lots of areas that are sandwiched together or quite difficult to access on it. And so it's quite difficult to guarantee a perfect paint finish over every part of that. And it's also quite easy to damage it assembling it, and we certainly don't want to paint it assembled because then there'll be quite a few areas that may need adjusting during the process of fitting the front end back together that then might not have paint on. So what we've done is paint that disassembled, but what they've done is effectively as a primer coat, paint it with a paint that we use quite a bit on running gear parts for cars, on underside road facing parts. We use powder coat on most suspension parts, but what we use on some is a product called Celimix Direct, which is a direct to metal urethane paint. It's incredibly tough. It's really good stuff. What we've done is prepared and primed the front frame, but then painted it with this Celimix Direct, but that's tintable with basically any colour. So we've tinted that to a colour that's almost a perfect match, not quite, but almost a perfect match to the actual final colour of the car. And then that's been scotched back, and then that will be painted with the actual final 2K acrylic colour. What it means is that if there's any areas where the coverage is difficult, or where we miss a tiny bit, or where there's a bit broken through during assembly, it means that anything that happens like that, the undercoating is exactly the same colour, give or take, as the final colour of the car. So effectively the primer, if you like, is the same colour as the car. It just gives us a safety margin on a really difficult part like that to make sure that there's coverage everywhere and that it is all the same colour. So it's quite a clever way of doing it actually, and that's worked out quite well. So that's in there awaiting its final colour now. So yeah, things are really coming together quite rapidly on the E-Type now, as you'd expect at this stage. Yeah, that's coming together, and then it'll be all the fun of getting all the chrome work sorted, I guess, will be the following phase on from that. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers where we're at. It's been a busy week. So yeah, until next time, see you then.